It began with a question that cut straight to the heart of South Africa's global standing. Critics argued that following the imposition of tariffs by former U.S. President Donald Trump, South Africa's response looked less like diplomacy and more like desperation. To them, the government had appeared to crawl on its knees before Washington, giving the impression of a junior partner rather than a sovereign nation. While other countries such as China, Canada, and the European Union responded firmly with retaliatory tariffs, South Africa seemed to take the softer route. For some, this was nothing less than humiliating. After all, the nation exports raw materials vital to the American economy: platinum, gold, and aluminum. Why, then, had South Africa not stood firm? Why not impose its own retaliatory tariffs and deepen ties with BRICS partners and the Global South instead of bending to Washington's pressure? The president's answer reflected a different vision. He reminded the nation that there are many ways to respond to unfair trade measures. Some countries chose confrontation. Others chose negotiation. South Africa, he insisted, had chosen the path of engagement. The tariffs, Washington claimed, were driven by trade deficits. Pretoria countered that this was misleading, and rather than escalate the standoff, government opted to sit down and argue the case directly. According to the president, this choice was not weakness but strategy, a way to secure the best outcome for South Africa. Central to his argument was the role of South Africa's private sector. Exporters and importers alike had been consulted, as had trade unions. Their livelihoods depended on stability, not on a reckless trade war. Retaliation may sound strong in theory, but in practice it risked thousands of jobs. South Africa's second-largest trading partner was on the line. Over 600 American companies operated within the country, employing tens of thousands of workers. To jeopardize these jobs in the name of political theater would be reckless. The president warned that playing to the gallery might look bold but would ultimately harm ordinary South Africans. Instead, Pretoria sought a mutually beneficial solution, one that preserved exports, attracted continued American investment, and maintained South Africa's leverage at the negotiating table. And leverage did exist. South Africa possessed what America needed most: critical minerals, backed by unique processing capacity and an energy infrastructure rare on the continent. These resources were not just raw commodities, they were bargaining chips, tools that could shape negotiations in South Africa's favor. This was not appeasement, the president stressed, but strategic engagement. To retaliate blindly would have been to risk an unpredictable war with an unpredictable U.S. administration. Better to negotiate from a position of strength, placing minerals, energy capacity, and investment opportunities on the table as instruments of leverage. South Africa, he declared, would never bow. It would never beg. It would negotiate as a sovereign equal, determined to secure the best possible deal for its people. The strategy seemed to bear fruit. Even in Washington, policymakers were beginning to recognize the costs of their own tariffs. Reports emerged that the U.S. administration had begun to exclude certain minerals from the list of taxed goods, an advantage for South Africa, and proof that patient, strategic engagement could yield results. The question then became, how could South Africa deepen this realization? How could it turn America's recognition of mutual dependency into a long-term advantage? The president's answer pointed again to the strength of South Africa's endowments. Minerals remained central, but the approach was not simply to ship them abroad in raw form. South Africa aimed to insist on beneficiation, the processing of these minerals domestically so that finished products, not just raw resources, left its shores. This strategy promised not only stronger bargaining power but also more jobs, more skills, and more economic growth at home. It was about leveraging natural wealth for national development. Negotiations, then, were not framed as submission but as a balance of needs. What did South Africa need from the United States? What did America need from South Africa? And how could those needs be aligned into a fair outcome? This was not the language of weakness but of equal partnership. A sovereign nation, said the president, does not rush to retaliate for applause. It acts with discipline, foresight, and strategy. The broader message was clear. South Africa's engagement with the United States was not one of supplication but of strength carefully deployed. The country carried weight in global trade, not only through its natural resources but also through its ability to process, develop, and export value-added goods. This strength was being used at the negotiating table. The government's representatives, supported by ministers and trade experts, were actively pressing this agenda in Washington. They were on the ground, advancing South Africa's case with confidence and determination. Ultimately, this debate highlighted a deeper divide in how nations respond to great power pressure. Should South Africa stand firm with retaliation, as some demanded, risking jobs and investment? Or should it engage strategically, using its resources as leverage while maintaining critical trade ties? The government had chosen the latter path, insisting that it was the wiser course for a nation still rebuilding its economy, still fighting unemployment, and still seeking its rightful place in the global order. For critics, the strategy might still look like weakness. For supporters, it looked like pragmatism. But for the president, the guiding principle was clear: South Africa would never be bullied. It would never kneel. It would engage with strength, insist on fairness, and walk away with a deal that advanced the interests of its people. This was not a story of appeasement. It was a story of strategy, a story of sovereignty, and a reminder that in the shifting landscape of global trade, South Africa's voice, if used wisely, could still command respect.